My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped into the weapon maintenance bay at 07:30 hours that Tuesday morning. In my 16 years commanding Navy SEALs, I'd developed a sixth sense for danger, and every instinct was screaming that something was catastrophically wrong. There she was, a woman in civilian clothes, methodically disassembling a Barrett M82A1 .50 caliber sniper rifle with surgical precision. My blood pressure spiked. This wasn't just any weapon. This particular Barrett required Level 5 clearance and direct authorization from the Pentagon itself. "Ma'am, step away from that equipment immediately." I barked, my voice echoing off the concrete walls with the authority of 16 years in special operations. She didn't flinch. Her slender fingers continued their delicate work, polishing each component to mirror brightness. The casual violation of security protocols made my chest burn with rage. "I can't do that, Commander," she replied without looking up, her voice unnaturally calm for someone caught in a major security breach. The use of my rank without introduction sent ice through my veins. My name wasn't on my uniform. My rank insignia was deliberately absent from this classified facility. Hell, my presence at Damneck wasn't even officially documented in any system. "How do you know who I am?" I demanded, stepping closer, my hand instinctively moving toward my sidearm. Every protocol I'd learned was telling me to restrain this intruder immediately. "The same way I know you've been losing sleep over the weapons maintenance backlog for the past 3 months," she said, examining a bolt through a magnifying glass with professional expertise. "Particularly this rifle, which hasn't been properly serviced in 11 months and 14 days. My anger transformed into cold, paralyzing fear. That specific information was buried in classified reports accessible to only 4 people in the entire U.S. Navy. The maintenance schedules for these weapons were compartmentalized at levels that required Admiral approval just to view. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. For the first time, she looked up. Her eyes were steel gray, steady and unflinching, the kind of eyes I'd only seen in operators who'd killed multiple times at close range. But there was something else there. Something that looked almost like bone-deep exhaustion mixed with profound sadness. "Today, I'm Sarah Chen, civilian ballistics consultant," she said. Her hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she set down her cleaning rod, the first sign of human vulnerability I'd seen. But my real identity died in a car accident 22 years ago, along with everyone who might have remembered who I used to be. I felt reality shifting beneath my feet like sand. This wasn't just unauthorized access. This was something far more complex and dangerous than anything I'd encountered in my career. "Biz Chen," I said, forcing authority into my voice, despite the growing sense that I was dealing with something beyond my clearance level. "You're violating multiple federal laws. This facility requires biometric scanning, keycard authorization escort by cleared personnel, and Admiral Harrison's personal authorization code." She interrupted smoothly. "Alpha 77 Charlie Delta updated this morning at 0347 hours by encrypted satellite transmission directly from the Pentagon's Special Access Programs Office." My legs nearly buckled. Admiral Harrison was the Director of Naval Special Warfare, a man whose security protocols were so strict that even his own deputy needed advance approval for meetings. His authorization codes were changed every 8 hours through procedures that required presidential oversight and involved multiple levels of cryptographic verification. "Now that's impossible," I whispered, feeling the ground shift beneath everything I thought I understood about security protocols. "Terminal 9, Commander. Check this weapon's complete service record. You'll find it enlightening." against every protocol screaming in my head, against 16 years of training that told me to call security immediately. I moved to the secure computer terminal. My hands shook as I entered my personal access codes and then the sequence she'd provided. The system accepted the authorization without question. The screen filled with data that stopped my heart completely. Barrett, M82A1, Serial 19847, Operational Classification, Omega, Black Assigned Operator, Redacted Confirmed Eliminations, 73, Maximum Engagement Distance, 247 meters, Mission Success, Rate 100%, Operational Theaters, 23, Next Deployment, Active, 16 hours. Jesus Christ. I whispered, scrolling through elimination records that read like a catalog of the world's most dangerous individuals. Then I froze on one entry that made my blood turn to ice. Target 41. General Viktor Kozlov. Eliminated via precision rifle fire, Dewey, 847 meters, Chechnya Theater of Operations. General Kozlov? I knew that name intimately. He'd been my instructor at the Naval War College's Advanced Tactical Course, a brilliant strategist whose theories on asymmetric warfare I'd studied extensively. He'd supposedly died in a helicopter crash 3 years ago during a NATO training exercise. According to this file, Sarah Chen had put a bullet through his head from nearly 2 miles away. Kozlov, I said, my voice barely audible, staring at the clinical description of his elimination. Sarah's hands stilled completely on the rifle components. When she spoke, her voice carried decades of buried regret and something that might have been genuine remorse. He was selling real-time American troop movements to Chechen militant networks, she said quietly. 17 soldiers died in ambushes because of his intelligence leaks. Their families were told they died in combat operations. She met my eyes directly, and I saw genuine pain there. I'm sorry you knew him personally. The casual acknowledgement hit me like a physical blow. This woman had eliminated someone I'd respected, someone whose tactical theories I'd studied and implemented in my own operations. The moral complexity made my head spin. How many others were people like him, Americans, people on our side? 7 of the 73. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. That's the part they don't explain during recruitment. Sometimes the greatest threats to national security come from within our own ranks. Sometimes patriots become traitors, and sometimes good people make terrible choices. I stared at this unremarkable woman who carried the weight of such impossible moral decisions. She looked like she could be a librarian or a college professor, not someone who'd spent decades eliminating threats that conventional military forces couldn't touch. Sarah, I said carefully, what's happening in 16 hours that requires this level of preparation? Her expression hardened into something I'd only seen in combat veterans who'd witnessed unspeakable atrocities. A cargo container currently docked at Pier 47 in Baltimore Harbor contains 47 kilograms of weaponized Novichok nerve agent, she said. The terrorist cell that acquired it will meet their buyer tomorrow at exactly 1400 hours to complete the transaction. My heart stopped beating. Novichok was the same chemical weapon used in the Salisbury assassination attempts, lethal in microscopic doses, persistent in the environment, and virtually undetectable until symptoms appeared. 47 kilograms could devastate entire city blocks and contaminate water supplies for months. Why not coordinate a full tactical response? I asked, though I was beginning to understand the impossible constraints of the situation. The container is rigged with motion sensors, proximity alarms, and atmospheric pressure detectors, she explained with clinical precision. Any approach within 500 meters triggers automatic release through a sophisticated dispersal system connected to the harbor's water intake. and the nearby subway ventilation systems. The meeting location is aboard a cargo vessel surrounded by 17 civilian ships, including 3 tourist boats carrying over 400 passengers. The impossible geometry of the situation became crystal clear. Traditional military intervention would guarantee the exact catastrophe they were trying to prevent. "What's your firing position?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "The abandoned grain elevator at Sparrow's Point. It provides direct line of sight across Baltimore Harbor with minimal civilian exposure. Distance to target, exactly 3,187 meters." I did the mental calculation and felt physically sick. That's nearly 2 miles. Through maritime air currents, atmospheric distortion from the water, with a moving target on a floating platform. The terrorist will be exposed for approximately 31 seconds while boarding the cargo vessel, she said, resuming her meticulous cleaning with steady hands. Weather forecast shows variable winds between 8 and 16 knots from multiple directions. Water temperature differential will create thermal layering that deflects projectile trajectory. The target vessel has a displacement pattern of approximately 47 feet with wave action. "And if you miss?" Sarah's expression became something I'd never seen before, a combination of absolute determination and barely controlled terror. "Then 400,000 Americans in Baltimore and Washington, D.C. die within 6 hours as the nerve agent disperses through water systems and atmospheric currents." The crushing weight of that number left me speechless. 400,000 innocent lives. Men, women, children, families, all depending on one perfect shot across an impossible distance under conditions that would challenge the laws of physics. "I need to ask you something personal," I said, studying her face for any sign of doubt or weakness. "The isolation, the secrecy, living without an identity. How do you handle the psychological pressure?" For a moment, her professional mask cracked completely. I saw profound loneliness, the kind that comes from decades of complete disconnection from normal human relationships and experiences. "Some nights I lie awake trying to remember what my mother's voice sounded like." She admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't recall my father's face anymore, or whether I had siblings, or what my favorite song was when I was 16. She paused, looking down at the rifle components. "I sacrificed everything normal people have. Memories, relationships, even my own name, so they could keep having those things. Most days that feels worth the cost." The raw honesty in her voice hit me harder than any combat experience I'd ever endured. This woman had voluntarily erased herself from existence to become a weapon in defense of strangers she'd never meet. She shouldered the rifle case with practiced ease, the 32 pounds of precision equipment seemingly weightless in her hands. "Commander, I need your absolute word that this conversation never happened." "You have it," I said without hesitation, then compelled by respect for what she was about to attempt. "Sarah, make the shot count." "Every shot I take counts, Commander. Tomorrow's just happens to count for 400,000 innocent lives." She walked toward the exit with the silent efficiency of someone who'd spent decades moving through restricted spaces. At the doorway, she turned back one final time. "Thank you for understanding why some secrets have to stay buried forever." Then she was gone, leaving me alone with a knowledge that would fundamentally change how I viewed our national security apparatus. The next day, I found myself unable to concentrate on routine duties. At 1300 hours, I retreated to my office and activated a secure communication channel that technically didn't exist, a real-time data feed from Baltimore Harbor that I absolutely should not have had access to. Through Sarah's scope, camera transmitted via encrypted satellite relay, I could see the target area with startling clarity. The cargo ship rocked gently in the harbor, surrounded by civilian vessels that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. From the grain elevator's elevation, the view was perfect, but the distance was staggering. Individual figures on the ship's deck were barely visible, even through high-powered optics. Overwatch, this is Ghost Actual. Sarah's voice came through the comm, steady and professional. Beginning final environmental assessment. Wind speed variable between 9 and 15 knots from the northwest. Water temperature differential creating significant thermal layering at 400 and 800 meter intervals. Target vessel displacement approximately 47 feet vertical with wave action every 12 seconds. I watched her hands make microscopic adjustments to the scope mounting system. The mathematical calculations required were staggering bullet drop over 187 meters wind drift, compensation target movement, prediction, atmospheric pressure variations, temperature gradients, and even the Earth's rotation during the 3.4-second flight time. Environmental conditions are marginal but acceptable, she reported. Proceeding with mission parameters. At 1,358 hours, movement appeared on the cargo ship's deck. Through the scope, I could see a figure in dark clothing walking purposefully across the ship's superstructure. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, carrying what appeared to be a reinforced briefcase. Target acquired. Sarah said, her voice tightening slightly with concentration. Male, approximately 180 pounds, moving toward the gangway at consistent pace. Range 3, 187 meters, and holding steady. I held my breath as she began the final firing sequence. Through the scope, the target appeared impossibly small, a tiny figure against the vast backdrop of Baltimore Harbor. Environmental change, Sarah reported suddenly. Wind gust from the east 16 knots duration, approximately 30 seconds. Recalculating trajectory. My heart hammered as I watched her hands move across the scope adjustments with mechanical precision. She had perhaps 20 seconds before the target disappeared into the ship's interior, beyond reach, free to complete the transaction that would doom hundreds of thousands. Additional complication. She muttered, her voice carrying the first hint of tension. Large seagull crossing primary flight path at 800-meter mark. Waiting for clear trajectory window. I found myself gripping my desk until my knuckles turned white. The bird seemed to hover directly between Sarah and her target, as if the universe itself was testing her patience and skill under impossible pressure. 15 seconds to target concealment, she announced. Bird is maintaining position. The target was now 3/4 of the way up the gangway, moving steadily toward the ship's entrance. In 10 more steps, he'd be inside the superstructure protected by steel bulkheads, free to deploy enough nerve agent to create the largest civilian casualty event in American history. 10 seconds. Bird clearing. I have a clear shot. The scope centered on the target's torso. Through the optics, I could see him clearly now, a middle-aged man with graying hair wearing an expensive suit, completely unaware that death was approaching at 2,800 feet per second from nearly 2 miles away. Taking the shot, Sarah whispered. I watched the crosshairs steady on the target's center mass. The slight, rolling motion of the ship, the variable crosswinds, the thermal distortion from the water's surface, all of it had to be calculated and compensated for in real time by a human brain operating under extraordinary pressure. The rifle fired. The recoil was barely visible through the scope camera, testament to Sarah's expert technique and the weapon's precise engineering. For 3.4 seconds, the longest 3.4 seconds of my life, there was absolute silence on the communication channel. I found myself holding my breath, staring at the small figure on the distant ship deck, watching him take another step up the gangway. Then he dropped, The target collapsed instantly, the briefcase tumbling from his grasp and sliding across the ship's deck. Even at this distance, through the scope's magnification, the result was unmistakable. He confirmed elimination. Sarah's voice came through steady and professional, despite what she'd just accomplished. Target neutralized. Package secured. Threat eliminated. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. 400,000 people would go to sleep safely that night, never knowing they'd been within hours of a death so terrible, it defied imagination. Within minutes, FBI and Coast Guard units positioned, and waiting for exactly this outcome, swarmed the cargo vessel. The terrorists' associates were captured, and the nerve agent was secured by hazmat specialists, and the greatest chemical weapons threat in American history was quietly eliminated. Ghost Actual returning to base, Sarah reported. Mission complete. The communication channel went silent. 6 hours later, the first official reports began filtering through intelligence channels. Critical terrorist threat neutralized in Baltimore Harbor through coordinated law enforcement action. No American casualties. Chemical weapons threat contained and secured by coalition special operations forces. No mention of the impossible shot. No credit to the ghost who'd made it possible. No acknowledgement that a single person had prevented mass casualties through a feat of marksmanship that challenged the boundaries of human capability. I sat in my office that evening, staring at the computer terminal where I'd accessed Sarah's classified file. The cursor blinked on the access log, waiting for me to make a decision that would define how I carried this knowledge for the rest of my career. Before I erased the records, I found myself scrolling through the list of Sarah's previous eliminations. 73 confirmed kills across 6 continents, each one representing a crisis, averted a catastrophe, prevented innocent lives saved. Terrorists, arms dealers, rogue intelligence officers, corrupt officials who'd sold American secrets for money. And General Kozlov, whose betrayal had cost 17 soldiers their lives. I thought about the moral complexity of a world where heroes sometimes had to eliminate other heroes who'd lost their way, where the greatest threats to freedom sometimes came from those sworn to protect it. I thought about Sarah Chen, whoever she'd been before that identity was created, lying awake trying to remember her mother's voice, while carrying the weight of 73 deaths on her conscience. I deleted the access logs and closed the classified file. The records would show routine maintenance performed by authorized personnel, nothing more. Then I walked to my office window and looked out at the base personnel going about their evening routines. Sailors heading to the mess hall, Marines conducting equipment checks, officers reviewing operational reports. None of them would ever know that a woman they'd never heard of had spent the day calculating wind speeds and thermal gradients to preserve their right to live normal lives. The weight of that secret settled on my shoulders, not heavy with burden, but substantial with the responsibility of protecting someone who'd sacrificed everything to protect others. Some knowledge was meant to be carried alone, and some guardians were meant to remain invisible. I thought about Sarah wherever she was now, probably field stripping her rifle and preparing for the next impossible crisis that could only be solved from very, very far away. The American people deserved to sleep peacefully, without knowing how many times people like her stood between them and unimaginable violence. 400,000 people were alive because one person had chosen to disappear so completely that even she couldn't remember who she'd been before becoming a weapon. There was something both terrible and beautiful about that arithmetic of sacrifice. One erased life, preserving hundreds of thousands of others. I gathered my papers and prepared to head home, carrying the quiet satisfaction of a secret well kept and a mission perfectly executed. Tomorrow, I would return to my normal duties, commanding SEALs in operations that would be documented, recognized, and eventually declassified. But I would also carry the knowledge that somewhere in the shadows, people like Sarah Chen were making impossible shots to solve problems that conventional forces couldn't touch. Some stories would never be told, and some heroes would never be known. That was exactly how it should be. As I walked across the base toward my quarters, I passed the weapon maintenance bay, where this had all begun. The facility was dark now, secured for the night, showing no trace of the conversation that had changed my understanding of how freedom was truly protected. In the distance, I could see the lights of civilian communities beyond the base perimeter. Thousands of families going about their evening routines completely unaware that their continued existence had depended on one perfect shot across Baltimore Harbor. Sarah Chen had given them that gift, and she'd done it while carrying the loneliness of someone who'd erased her own past to secure their future. Some sacrifices were too profound for recognition, and some guardians were too valuable to acknowledge. In the arithmetic of national security that was the most important equation of all,